Welcome to Beyond Distribution with GTDC. This episode was recorded during our European Vendor Summit we hosted in the beautiful city of Noordwijk in the Netherlands. During this panel, moderated by Frank Vitagliano, CEO of the GTDC, you will hear from David Grant, CEO of Westcon International, Philippe Jarre, CEO of Mindware, Miriam Murphy, President of Europe for TD SYNNEX, and Klaus Schlichtherle, CEO of Infinigate. You'll hear their thoughts on what the biggest challenges and opportunities for the channel in 2024 are, and how distribution is innovating to drive new technology sales and market adoption. Listen and enjoy this episode of Beyond Distribution with GTDC, and don't forget to visit the GTDC Knowledge Hub to access additional podcast episodes and other valued industry resources. Visit www.gtdc.org.
One of the sessions that we always end our events with is a leadership panel. And so what we like to do is take or ask 4 of the senior executives in EMEA for our distributors to participate in a panel and do a little bit of a Q&A on what they're thinking relative to all the things that we've talked about in terms of what's happening with the business, what's happening with your specific business, where are the investments being made, et cetera. So I'd like to invite my panelists to come up on stage. All right, well, the first thing we're going to do is I'd like each of you to introduce yourself, your company, and we'll spend a minute just talking a little bit about that. So David, let's start with you.
Good, great. Okay.
Yep.
Tough questions.
Yeah, easy one.
So I'm David Grant. I'm the CEO of Westcon Comstore. International business covering all markets outside of the Americas. Published our results last week. 5 billion of gross revenues, which I know is smaller than some of my colleagues. But yeah, we're delighted to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Miriam?
Thanks, Frank. So I'm Miriam Murphy. I'm the president for EMEA for TD SYNNEX.
Excellent. Philippe?
You stop there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm Philippe Jarre. I'm probably a new guy here in the block. 25 years for IBM, 5 years as a system integrators, and 5 years in distribution. And I'm the CEO now of a company called Mindware, close to $2 billion, only dedicated for Middle East and Africa.
Yeah. And recent GTDC member last year. Yep.
This is my first year. So thank you for having me with such an audience.
My name is...
I think it is. Is this mic on?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So my name is Klaus Schlichtherle. I'm the group CEO of the Infinigate group. We are a specialized distributor on cybersecurity, operate in 50 countries, 2.5 billion revenue, and very much focused on this cyber topic. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, that's great. So, okay, that was the easy part now, so let's get to the harder part. So, Miriam, we're going to start with you. First of all, welcome back. We're really happy to have you back in our space. You left us for a couple of years, but kind of always had the feeling you would come back. So, you know, as we know, the industry and the channel is constantly evolving. I went through it earlier about some of the things. But so you left for a couple of years, and obviously you still were in a very significant role, you know, in the industry. But tell me about your observations of sort of now that you're back, what's changed, and you know, how do you feel about that constant evolution that we're seeing?
Yeah, so look, Frank, you know, I suppose, you know, I didn't leave the industry in the sense that I was leading a service provider in Europe, but it was definitely looking at it from a different perspective.
Sure.
And so I would say, you know, 8 weeks back in distribution, the couple of things that are really, really foremost that have been gathering momentum, of course, AI everywhere. And the opportunities that is bringing to us, but also, as somebody said in a recent security event, you know, that it becomes a blessing and the curse if we're not careful about how we manage it. So that the opportunities and the pull through around AI momentum is certainly gathered a lot of pace. And secondly, the everything as a service progression has really accelerated. And I think overall, when we think about the evolution of technology, what I've seen very, very prevalently is whatever we think about the pace of change over the last 10 years, 15 years, the next 5 to 10 years I see as one of, really an accelerated pace of change. When you think about, the movement of everything as a service and how that's changed the opportunity for distributors across the whole continuum of the portfolio, we started much earlier in this segment supporting subscription and consumption models. But they were very much in a niche area, in a classical software portfolio, software companies. And what's now happened is that has moved across all areas of technology, from devices right through to, all of the infrastructure providers are looking at solutions. And that particular momentum has gathered huge pace in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And it opens up opportunities for distribution, because especially those who have gained a lot of experience in software as a service and the momentum of moving to subscription and consumption in the software area, that expertise is something we can really support vendors who are kind of making that transition at a later stage, or where application support is becoming a stronger part of their software-defined portfolio.
Yeah.
So they're the two areas I would say most. I mean, there's been lots of other changes.
Yeah, but that's a really interesting point. And I will tell you, the second area, the evolution of the consumption models, has really a profound impact on your customers, too, which is the other piece. Having been a customer for a couple of years of distribution, I can tell you that change fundamentally changes their business, and they're going to look to you to help them get there, right? Like they've done all along. And the data we showed before of the partner satisfaction with distribution feeds right into it. And so as that continues, you'll continue to put, I'm sure, services and offerings in place that'll help that transition, because it's very significant. Philippe, Emily Mansfield provided us with a pretty comprehensive economic outlook for EMEA, certainly for the world, but for EMEA. And there's obviously, lots of significant uncertainties based on the macroeconomic issues as well as other factors beyond our control, even for reasonably high growth areas like yours, right? Because you happen to be in one. But how do you feel like distributors and companies like yours and your colleagues on the panel here, how do you feel like distributors are minimizing those uncertainties and helping the vendors and partners face that today?
Yeah. Actually, it's a very good question. I moved to Dubai 10 years ago, and when I got the job as a distributor, I was not sure that the real value for distributors was still going to exist, right? When you look at the Middle East market, this is the region where uncertainty is the most important in the world. Actually, this is 4%, less than 4% of IT spending, 96% of the risk, okay? So there is a role for the distributor in the middle to help the vendors to minimize the risk and help the partners to minimize the risk as well. But you cannot look at this as Middle East, because you have more than 50 countries. So you need to segment in 3 categories. You have the 3 big ones, Saudi, Qatar, UAE. Huge investment capabilities, no currency risk, limited skills, but still a lot of energy and development of skills. Second category are the others where currency risk is very low, but they don't have the funding that are coming from the government. So you have Bahrain, Oman, Kuwait, all these countries. And then you have the rest of the group, which are most African countries, where the currency risk is very high, where you have limited fundings, but you may have some great opportunities. And when you deal with the vendors, because we cover all the regions, they always tell me, Philippe, we want you to invest in Nigeria. We want you to go on this deal on Egypt. Let me manage UAE and Saudi myself. It doesn't work like this. You need to have the full capabilities, and then we share the profit and we share the risk. Yeah. And this is what we have been doing so far. But to make it happen in this market, you need to apply rules which are sometimes, we stay compliant, but you need to be flexible. It's all about relationship. Who do you know? Who can you influence to make a deal happen? And how can you bring to the partners the skill they don't have? Because most of the partners don't have the skill to develop these new technologies. And the investments are massive, massive right now. Yeah. So I feel lucky. Okay, we have been growing by 25% component grades for the last 5 years, and when I have a lot of colleagues here that I talk to about the European growth, it's more difficult. I feel lucky, but no, it's not that easy. Huh? You need to manage your risk all the time.
Yeah, there's a lot of folks that would like to be in that space with that 25% growth factor. But, but David, as I mentioned earlier, we recently did a report, GTDC Beyond the Marketplace, right? Yeah. And it talked about distribution and hosted digital platforms becoming vital part, the IT ecosystem. Westcon recently announced significant investments in the area. What benefits do you see these platforms providing, both the vendor community and certainly your customers, and what's your view on how that's going to impact business going forward?
Okay. So there's no doubt that any platform marketplace now, whatever we want to call it, is got to deal with a lot more complexity. We've got to deal with hardware, subscription services, multi-vendor environments. So I think that has to be a starting point. But the transactional component, I don't know that anyone would see that as anything other than taking sort of cost complexity out of the business. I think where the distribution platforms can become really exciting for the vendors and the partners is how we use them to drive incremental opportunity. Particularly in a market that is increasingly tough compared to how it was 12, 18 months ago in a number of sectors. The opportunity to use a lot of the data that we have to look at those upsell, cross-sell, expansion, whichever one of those components you want to call it, but to take those opportunities and be putting them into the single place where our partners should come to look at their interactions with us, and then supported by our teams. That I think is really what the vendors are looking for in many cases, which is where's the distribution-led business opportunity. So taking the data that we have, driving those opportunities, putting them into the marketplace, so that the partners and the vendors can see real incremental business. I think that's where the exciting part of the marketplace is going to move to.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think everybody kind of takes the core competencies of distribution, I personally think, for granted, right? Because they've been doing it for so long and for so well at scale that it's easy to take it for granted, right? And so they expect that the transactional pieces will continue to get done very efficiently, and that'll help that. But the differentiator does become growing volumes and demonstrating the fact that you can actually help, your
drive incremental value.
Yeah, driving incremental business. So that's really important. Klaus, innovative new technology has been a constant in the IT landscape, particularly in the area of security, which has become increasingly important over the last few years and clearly will remain so. I was talking to somebody earlier about number of vendors, and there's I can't even count the number of security vendors that that are out there in the marketplace.
30,000.
Yeah, exactly. So you can. How do you and your team assess those offerings and those vendors and try to figure out which ones are going to be the ones that make sense over time?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, there are 30,000 out there.
Yeah.
So whom to pick, and are they coming to us and ask? We have a rigid process, and it has to do with the complexity in cybersecurity. First, we look at the technology. So is that technology fitting into our portfolio? Because you don't want to distribute 5 vendors with the same technology. It doesn't make sense, because you need to give advice to the channel, and then you don't look like an advisor, trusted advisor anymore. So we look at the technology. Second, we look at the go-to-market strategy of the vendor. Do they have a channel program? Are they channel friendly? And can they have people on the ground to help us to scale? Mm-hmm. And if we tick all those boxes, usually we go. It's pretty straightforward.
You've made it sound very simple.
Yeah, it sounds simple, but it's highly complex. Specifically, the assessment on the technology. You need a lot of knowledge inside of the company to do the assessment. The rest, I think, is pretty much similar to any other distribution company. You look at the go-to-market model, and is there a total available market which is attractive at the end, and is there any people on the ground helping you to scale it? But the technology piece is extremely important.
Yeah. Miriam, going back to you, you know, and you touched on this a little bit, but we're going to go a little deeper. So over the past decade, the industry has certainly shifted. Like, it's focused from point cloud solutions to everything as a service to infrastructure as a service, you know, et cetera. What do you see as the current and future role of distribution, you know, in this transition, and how specifically is, you know, TD SYNNEX and obviously your colleagues helping both the vendors and the partners in this transition? In other words, what specific offerings and programs do you think, you know, you'll put in place as time goes on, or have you put in place?
Yeah, so in fact, you made a reference when we touched on it earlier, Frank, about how it's having an impact on our customers, on our partners' business models, and them needing our help to transition, which is very true. But that's also the case for the vendors, because many of them are really grappling with this management of deferred revenue. What's that? What does that mean to us? Well, actually, in some cases, we're finding pressures for some internal management of that deferred revenue process, which is putting more pressure down into distribution to take the burden of that from them. So recognizing immediate, long-term contracts in a shorter cycle to avoid that deferred revenue issue. But that's just one of the areas where, we have to manage those, like Klaus's point on trying to manage that fragmentation of the vendor base and making selections. They're just the complexities. But the areas that I think are most important for us, and that certainly at TD SYNNEX we've invested a lot in, are first of all the enablement element for partners in terms of that transition. So the technology acceleration teams that we've put in place that are really focused on the pre-sales, the commercial modeling and operational process support for partners as they make those transitions into as-a-service models. The second point, so that's enablement. The second part is, of course, the facilitation around platforms and providing systems that allow partners to become embedded in our own digital transformation. And that's a journey, and that's one that I believe, we will all be continuing to invest in. And that's where it becomes a competition, right? It's like, how quickly can we get there? Because getting to that point where you have that seamless embedded connection with partners gives you a real advantage. So that's really important. Then the other part is around the balance of aggregation. Aggregation of solutions with multi-vendor solutions, not just multi-vendor, even within a vendor, supporting the aggregation of a solution for a partner within that. And that's becoming much more diverse. What I've seen, and this has been particularly, coming back in and looking with fresh eyes, what I've seen is that was very much the domain of the infrastructure players. That has now stretched to each end of the continuum. So it's stretched, to the device, and the supporting, platforms that enable device as a service, incremental service offerings to be included in the portfolio with device. It also brings up a new opportunity in working with the hyperscalers. We have lots of conversations on, what's the role of distribution as it pertains to hyperscalers. And certainly, you know, we've invested a lot in building those relationships, and it has given us an opportunity to look at aggregation, to look at multiple go-to-market models that incorporate the hyperscalers rather than alienate them.
Yeah.
So they're just three of the areas. So, you know, it's enablement, it's digital transformation as it pertains to platforms, and it is then incremental services and managing that aggregation.
Yeah, and to me, there's an added level of complexity based on the fact that every one of the tier one vendors is probably doing it a little bit differently. And forcing you to, you know, work separately with each of them, and then hopefully maybe developing some standardization that then can be applied to the tier two vendors who maybe aren't as specific as to what their requirements are, I would imagine.
Well, and there's one additional point to that, which is almost all of the as-a-service models that have been developed around infrastructure have been developed with the end user process in mind.
Right.
Starting off as a direct sale motion.
Right.
And you know, when I think about that, that brings me back like 20 years where you were, you know, trying to work with vendors to introduce a tier two model into their processes that were geared exclusively for,
Direct.
you know, direct engagement. Yep. But that's happened all over again when it comes to as a service because they're set up that way. And now you've got much more complexity because what happens if you have a chain and the commitment is for 3 years, 5 years? And what happens if someone in the middle of the chain breaks down?
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, in terms of financial, you know, issues. That's, you know, a constant.
Not emotionally.
No. Not emotionally. Although it might cause an emotional breakdown, David. But that's another thing we're having to grapple with all the time.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it reminds me of, you know, back in the day, and I worked for IBM for a long time, and they had an excellent, you know, large enterprise business, and we wanted to get into the SMB business, and people thought all you need to do is dumb down the enterprise stuff to get into SMB. Well, that's really not the case. You kind of have to build it from, you know, the bottom up. So, yeah, that's good. Philippe, we've talked a lot about AI, obviously, and there is no conference, there's no meeting, there's no IT discussion that we're all going to have that doesn't get to it. But it's part of every technology discussion and will seemingly remain so for quite some time. But what are you doing specifically at Mindware? Are you utilizing any of the technologies internally yet? You know, and in general, how do you think distributors can help the vendors and their partners effectively deploy and, more importantly, monetize AI as we go forward? What are your thoughts there?
First, I'd like to congratulate Philippe for your presentation. It was exactly on the spot of what needs to be done on AI. We are using AI. We have Copilot, as probably most of you. Everybody knows now when I'm sending an email if I did it myself or somebody else did it using Copilot, because my English level is much better with Copilot. And I was recently in an event with Satya, the CEO of Microsoft, was there to work with big clients in Dubai. And he talked about exactly what you put on your chart. He said the education system, traditional one, is you teach kids, to answer questions. The new education systems needs to be changed for people to know how to ask questions. And I'm telling you, inside the company, we are trying to understand how to ask questions, and it's not easy at all. Right? We are deploying 2 projects, one on marketing and one on back office automation. On marketing is to produce marketing materials much more quickly. And to leverage all the data we have in the company. And the other one is to accelerate the process of back office. Regarding the way to go to market, 1 year ago we decided that we wanted to dominate on AI, and it's very ambitious. But so we signed a partnership with NVIDIA. It was almost 1 year ago now. And we built an ecosystem, a dedicated unit, an ecosystem which is based off all the ISVs gravitating around NVIDIA, all the storage and other players that are around this system. And we signed a partnership with a company in the US who have been working with NVIDIA for 15 years. And they have probably around 1,500 use cases already developed by industry. So for example, you take the roadmap of an information system of a bank. In information system of the bank, you have the credit management, you have supply chain, you have contact center, just like you presented. And they have been able to identify what are the quick ROI if you implement AI in this industry. And there's this for oil and gas, for retail, for telco. So we signed with them an exclusive agreement, and now we are educating all our ecosystem, all our partners, how to leverage these capabilities, not to tackle the big deals, because the big deals, you know, the mega GPUs and the superpod that will be signed by NVIDIA directly, they don't need us. But all the rest of the market needs to move to AI, and they have no clue how to do it. I spent, you know, I did probably 100 meetings with the top CEO of our business partners. None of them know how to tackle the AI business unit. So we are educating them this. We are bringing 80% of the development already done for them to implement this, and we are helping them to talk to the end users. But we are not a service player, so we white label our resources for the partners to be able to tackle the market. And I think this is going to fly very well. And we are even educating some of our salespeople from our vendors.
Yeah. So it begins to, it continues to accelerate the transition from hardware to software and services, which has obviously been happening for
clearly. And this is the only way to go.
Yeah, that's great. That makes a lot of sense. David, AWS, Google, Microsoft, hyperscalers, you know, we in other companies with hyperscaler services, it continues to expand their business-oriented offerings and programs while seemingly strengthening, you know, alliances with the global distributors, right? In fact, we did a panel here 2 years ago where Google and AWS, you know, participated. What's your viewpoint on the benefits and the drawbacks of these alliances? And more importantly, how do you see it playing out here over the next couple of years? Because I think a lot of people would conclude that there could be a lot of co-opetition there.
Yeah. So I think Microsoft has always been seen as a very channel-centric vendor to start with. But I think the biggest shift that I've seen in a hyperscaler go-to-market is with AWS. If you go back probably 4 or 5 years, or maybe not even that long, there was you know, a definite ambition to disintermediate the channel, and distribution really wasn't a big part of that landscape. And in a number of the cases of the vendors that we worked with, they were developing a separate sales go-to-market, which effectively was direct alignment with AWS, even potentially to the end user. And they all were, not all, but those that were doing it had a level of trepidation, which is that they felt compelled to do something with AWS because they didn't want to miss out. But they all also were nervous about how is their existing channel going to view that route to market. I think AWS have moved significantly now, so you know, including distribution in their go-to-market, so that we can, you know, the programs that they are piloting, allowing distribution organisations to procure from the vendors in the normal way and work through their marketplace. And AWS have definitely, like most other technology vendors, realised the benefits of using distribution for reach, scale, technical capability, transactional ease. So I think that there is definitely a renewed view of distribution as part of the solution, not part of the takeout plan. I think the challenge, though, is that you've now got effectively 3 tiers in the go-to-market. Yeah. And you know, that margin stack starts to, you know, you need to look at the impact there. And of course, the other risk is that unless distribution can demonstrate adding significant value in that chain and that go-to-market, then you know, it isn't inconceivable that, you know, we can be squeezed. Yeah. So I think that all of the things that we've talked about in terms of how we add value, you know, so you know, AWS, for example, still can't transact really outside of US dollars or software from my experience with them. So all the time we're managing currency risk, looking at device and subscriptions as well. You know, we're providing them with a significant solution to their problems. So I think long term it will be a significant part of the go-to-market, but I don't think it won't replace as much as I think we might have feared a few years ago. But it's billions of dollars for sure.
Yeah, and I agree. I think, but the other thing I would add to it, from my perspective, having watched this evolve over the years, is there's one other element that becomes really important, and that is there's an element of trust that your customers have in distribution, in distributors.
Yep.
They've been working with you for, as I said, 40 years.
Yep.
They completely understand your strategy relative to helping them go to market versus you going to market. Yep. And I do think there's a little bit of trepidation going forward as to whether or not those relationships with a hyperscaler will continue to, they can be comfortable with that, right? And so I think that becomes a really important factor in addition to everything else you've mentioned.
Well, the channel has a very long memory.
Totally.
When vendors miss a step. So it doesn't take much to lose the trust and the engagement.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Good. Klaus, so given all the discussion today about innovative new technologies, the evolution of go-to-market changes or consumption models, et cetera, and additional services, how do you envision your overall portfolio of product, services, and programs, et cetera, changing over the next couple of years?
Yeah, again, very good question, and I think David and Miriam have already alluded to that quite a bit. And cybersecurity is lagging in that process a little bit. It's going also into as a service, big time. So you have firewall as a service, you have SOC as a service. I mean, there are many cybersecurity products and services which have not been in that particular sales mode, and it goes all into as a service. Mm-hmm. The trend has started now in cybersecurity. As I said, it's lagging, compared to traditional software, for example. Yep. But there's a big push behind it. It means also to build up digital platforms to basically provide the services digitally to the whole chain. And it has the same effects as, probably my colleagues have seen earlier than we are seeing now. But it's a huge push and trend, and we are obviously preparing ourselves, have a digital platform, transact a lot already on the subscription model, but that's the biggest move in cybersecurity for the next couple of years. I would envision, and we have roughly 200 million on our digital platform on a subscription model, that this will go easily to half of our business within the next 3 to 4 years.
Sure. Yeah. So what I'd like to do now is, one of the things we try to do when we do these panels is not ask the same question of each participant, because by the time it gets to the last person, it'd just be, what they said, right? So I try not to do that, but I'm going to violate my rule, and I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it in really 2 areas. One is, as I've said before, many of you know, our main constituency from a GTDC standpoint is the vendor community, right? And what we want to continue to do is work toward helping educate the vendor community on what distributors do and the value that they provide. And so what I would ask each of my panelists here is, what would your ask be of the vendor community, right? In terms of, how you engage with them, what they do, that type of thing. And then secondly, any closing remarks on anything that maybe that we didn't cover that you would like to, you'd like to bring up. So, Miriam, I'll start with you.
Well, actually, I guess my ask is probably quite similar to the ask that I would have given, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and that's one of the things around everybody finds it very easy to think of what distribution should be. And I think the pace of change that we've demonstrated as a channel player over the last 10 years, 15 years, has demonstrated that that's a risky business, to underestimate how we can form part of your future strategy. So my first ask would be to always keep an open mind in terms of how we can facilitate your strategy and your own transformation. in terms of our capabilities. Because we're investing very heavily in digital transformation, not just for ourselves, but for the breadth of our partners. And if I think in our case in Europe alone, that's like over 50,000 partners that are engaged with. And so don't underestimate and don't predefine what you believe our role should be. Keep an open mind in terms of strategic discussions. And the second one is really understanding, taking the time to really understand the economics of the model. And understanding that it is a balance. I think Philippe said it very well, which is the balance of the easy and the hard, the rich and the poor combination is really, really important because one offsets the other. And we're corporations. We're looking to drive our own profitability, and finding the way to invest with us in those new transformations is one that's really important.
Yep.
So that would be my two.
Philippe?
No, just like, no. It's a joke.
Just what she said, right, exactly. Okay, we're done.
It's a joke. No, I just one question I would say for the vendors, because in this job you have the possibility to see the best practices of every vendor. And I wanted to ask the vendor themselves who are here, do you assess yourself compared to your competition? Do you see what are the best practices? For example, I'm working with Dell, I'm working with Lenovo. Do you know what Lenovo is doing when you're in Dell? Do you know what Dell is doing when you're at Lenovo? Do you understand what Microsoft is doing in terms of number of distributors compared to AWS? Because I think it will be very beneficial for all this community to look at the best practices, and let's be sure that we try to push all the vendor community to go to these best practices. All the ecosystem will be beneficial. So it's a nice wish. I used to work for a big American company. I know how difficult sometimes it is. But if we can try to move up the best practices for everybody here, I think it will be fantastic.
Yeah. Klaus?
Yeah, again, cyber is different.
Yeah.
So I would like to see increased, intensified channel enablement, because cyber requires a lot of training, technical enablement, certification, pre-sales, post-sales. There's a lot of stuff which needs to be done, so a reseller is actually enabled to really sell those highly complex products. And for us, it would be great, that vendors in that area, and I don't think there's a lot here in the room, are basically intensifying really the collaboration in terms of developing the market access. This is a business which is growing in a nice and steady rate. It's in the meantime a multi-billion market, so it's really gotten big, so not really a small niche anymore. And I think that requires a lot of collaboration when it comes down to the channel enablement and development to get skilled and qualified resellers to sell products to end users. And that would be my ask, collaboration on the channel enablement piece.
David, you can bring us home.
Well, thank you. I think there's a few things. The first one is I would ask that in the vendors developing programs and initiatives, design them for a two-tier go-to-market out the gate. Miriam, you made the point that sometimes if it's got a one-tier engagement and then you try and reverse engineer distribution into it, it never works well. So please think about distribution first. That doesn't mean, of course, that you don't have a one-tier route to market, but if you've designed it for two-tier, going to one-tier is much more straightforward. I think that as the market and the competition becomes, tougher, and I don't think it matters whether it's cyber, networking, software, the market is tougher. Nearly all of the vendor community have rules of engagement and have, programs and policies. At a time when it's tough, it's really hard to make sure that you drive the governance into your sales teams at that, grassroots level. And I'd ask you to do that, because otherwise I think we end up with a great strategic relationship that sometimes gets too fractured at the point of execution. Very, very tactical, but I think that's not substitution for we're not going to be flexible. This is really about, people dictating our margin and the return we get in a transaction. So, as I said, when we've delivered value, I think it's reasonable that distribution gets rewarded for that, but that doesn't mean we wouldn't be flexible. I think all of my, well, I know my colleagues are flexible. I see that every day.
Yeah. Good.
And so my final point is, you know, make distribution a strategic part of your go-to-market and bring us in on those on that planning. And I think Miriam's point there is also correct. Bring us in to help us understand where we can add the most value.
Yeah, that's great. Well, one of the things that one of your colleagues at one point, and I forget who it was and I forget when it happened, but I remember what they said, which was the worst thing any of you could hear is one of your customers saying, or one of your vendors saying, geez, I didn't know you did that.
Yeah.
Right? Because your services are evolving so quickly and so significantly with you know, the innovation that's happening in the marketplace that if you don't stay engaged and you don't have the conversations, you don't know what's going on. So that would be my ask of the vendor community in the room is keep those discussions going, keep that engagement going, because you'd be shocked at the proliferation of services and support capabilities that have happened beyond pick, pack, and ship and finance. Right? Okay, so with that, I want to thank my panelists. Yep, and any last comments, anybody? Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.